Hi, everyone. In today's conversation with authors, and this is the first conversation with authors for the year 2022, we have Daniel T. Jackson, the author behind Illborn, the first book in the Illborn saga, visiting the channel today. And yeah, just to get things started, Daniel, can you tell us a bit about yourself and about your book, Illborn?
Okay, well, thanks for having me. First of all, Petrik, I'm delighted to be on your channel. I'm a debut author, as you know, who's written book Illborn that was published last year. Illborn is an epic medieval fantasy with four main points of view characters. Would you like me to give a bit more detail about the story, Petrik?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well, without giving too many spoilers, the premise for Illborn is there's a medieval fantasy world, and 800 years earlier, within that world, was a deity, Aedual, who forcibly united the peoples of that world and then ascended to heaven. Fast forward 800 years later, and the world's become more fragmented, with a number of countries, more religious persecution, but there is still one largely dominant religion around that world. Into that world, four young men and women are born who start to develop supernatural powers. And the story is really what happens to those four young men and women as they and other people begin to become aware of those powers against the backdrop in the world where there's increasing threat of war and increasing religious persecution. I don't want to say too much more than that.
Religious persecution is one of the biggest themes in Illborn, right? So I was wondering, what's the biggest inspiration behind the story in Illborn?
Yeah, it's a very good question. You're quite right. Religion is in the story. Again, without giving spoilers, if I go back to the idea for Illborn, is one that has been in my head for many years. So I came up with the core premise for the story a long time ago, and I've been developing the plot ideas in my head for a long time as that's gone on as well. And as a bit of a teaser, if I said that the core premise in the book, if I was to do an elevator pitch for what the book is about, it's teased at in book one, but it's not actually revealed. So I can't say too much about that in this, but you're quite right. Religion plays into the story, and it's something that I found it interesting to create a book where there is an overarching religion with a monotheistic religion with a single god that a lot of the world is devoted to, and to then see how that plays into a story where there might be elements of magic in it, might be elements of miracles, but it would give a slightly different take on a way that stories have been told in other fantasy worlds where there might be a greater emphasis, for instance, on magic than there is on the religious side of things. So it was a different way to approach epic fantasy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. So I was wondering, so does this mean that you have been, like, let's say you have wanted to become an author since you were a kid?
Yeah, it's a bit of a long-winded story. If anyone had asked me as a child, what do I want to be when I grow up? The answer was, I want to be an author, I want to write a novel, and I want to write a fantasy novel. And I actually wrote my first fantasy novel when I was 16 years old. So in the days before word processing software or having a PC, I had an old style typewriter. I tapped out an entire story. It was called Silver Night at the age of 16. Got myself a completing manuscript. For some reason, posted the entire manuscript off to one publisher. The entire thing came. Don't think I took a copy either, so I couldn't afford to. The entire thing came back with a rejection letter, and then I think I lost my nerve after that, thinking, maybe this is me. So then you get carried away. Then I was into doing my exams, A levels. I went to university. I got a career. As is coming up to you quite soon, I got married, and then after that had children, and suddenly life's taken over. So and I'd carry on writing, but I was only writing parts of stories or starts of stories or short stories for my children. but I never
Oh.
would have had the time to write a novel. But throughout the time, I was saying to people, one day I'm going to become a fantasy author, and I'm going to write myself a book. And I finally got the chance to do that in my mid-40s. I was able to reduce my time commitment to my day job, and then as soon as I'd done that, within a couple of months of doing that, I started writing Illborn, and then a couple of years after that, I had the finished book in 2020. So it was very much the fulfillment of a lifelong ambition to write a book, and that was
Ah.
the first part of it was the writing the book, and then only after that was done was the thought process of right now, what do I do with it? So yeah, what happens next? It's been a good process.
But I think that's interesting though. It's like every step led you towards this. And I think Illborn, as you know already, I loved Illborn so much. And I think it's this process that actually led you to creating something as amazing as this. I'm I'm really amazed by this one, by the way. I already told you about this, but this is truly one of the best fantasy debut that I've read.
I really appreciate you saying that, Petrik, and I appreciate the review that you did, and the exposure that you've given to the book. It has made an enormous difference to the book in the last couple of months. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'm the one who should be thanking you really for writing such a great book. And also, so it has been it has been quite a while before you became an author like right now. So who's your favorite authors and series growing up?
Growing up, so
Yeah.
my brother introduced me to a number of series. So I started off quite early on books like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and
Ah.
then read the Shannara books by Terry Brooks and the Rift War cycle by Raymond
Hmm.
Feist. The books that I absolutely loved as a teenager, Memory, Sorrow and Thorn by Tad Williams. Absolutely loved that series. And I've got a signed copy of the hardback of Tigrani Angel Tower, which is one of my most treasured possessions.
Nah.
I, I got into the Wheel of Time when I was 16 or
Hmm.
17 years old, and then bought those books as they came out over the next 2 decades. So
Wow.
I experienced that story as it was coming out, and that had a massive impact on me. And then outside of fantasy, authors that I love, a lot of it comes back to, even though it's not fantasy, it comes back to the epic side of things, of multiple characters, multiple events, multiple countries, religion,
Hmm.
etc. I love Stephen King as an author. I just think he's
Ah.
an absolutely brilliant writer for telling stories. And his book on writing, I've devoured that many times over, of how,
Oh.
his advice on how to create a story.
Oh.
Ken Follett is
This
a
one?
Ken that one, yeah. I think
Ah.
the part two of that is brilliant.
Okay.
Um, Ken Follett and his historical fiction books, Pillars of the
Ah.
Earth, World Without End, I think they're marvelous books. And then Anne Rice is another fantastic author for, in the vampire stories that she wrote, and also the Witching Hour stories, of how she'd tell these massive stories set over time, and she'd blend all these different styles into it. So those are the writers I loved growing up. More recently, I love Stephen Erikson, and I think his books are brilliant. They're not for everybody, but for me, I
Yeah.
just think they're excellent. Yeah, and lots of other good writers recently, but certainly the ones from the early days that had a big impact on me were the likes of Robert Jordan, um,
Hmm.
Tad Williams, and I've forgotten to mention George R. Martin. I love the first. I love the first three books of A Song of Ice and Fire. They are kind of fancy perfection for me.
Hmm.
Not so much the later ones, but the first
Yeah.
three I thought were perfect.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that, especially on the Song of Ice and Fire. I heard that it gets so much better for book four and book five on second read, but I haven't made that second read yet. And I also definitely agree with you with Steven Erikson on Malazan Book of the Fallen. Absolutely amazing stuff. Amazing stuff.
I'm glad you're a fan, because not everybody is. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
just the intricacy and richness of that world, and the way he tells stories. I mean, I don't think there's anyone who can write as many points of view as
Mm.
well in a book. You get books like Reaper's Gale where it's kind of 80 to 100 points of view in a book. Thinking, how are you doing this? It's
Yeah.
brilliant.
When I was reading that, I actually struggled, because there are so many characters here. And speaking of the number of characters, your book, Illborn, is contained with 4 characters, right? It's four
Yeah,
characters, Corin, Alana, Liana, and also Arian, 4 of them.
yeah.
And who, I found them all very compelling. I really love reading all 4 POV characters, but who's your favorite characters to write between 4 of them?
I'm deliberately not going to answer that question. I enjoy writing all of them, and I'm
uh,
right. I enjoy slipping back into the shoes of each character when I come back to write them, because it is certainly for some of the characters, there's a very different mindset required to write them from the way they think about things. So I from the outset haven't wanted to pick a favorite amongst them. I've wanted to, give treat each character with fairness and give them the time and space each of them needs. I mean, I think one thing that was really important to me in writing the characters and writing the book was to create, make people think and make people feel and have emotions for the characters. So I wanted to try to create them so they all felt realistic, but with difference between them. And I also wanted to create them also that it felt that there was varying levels of sort of human fragility in them, and that they weren't all perfect characters who get everything right, do everything perfectly, and always pick the right option. I wanted to create characters who had frailties, had varying degrees of moral grayness attaching to them, and who sometimes I want people to understand why they make the decisions they make, but not always agree with them. Particularly for one of the characters, I think you could make that case. But yeah, it's so I enjoy writing them all, and I enjoy coming back to write them all. And I'm determined not to pick a favourite for myself, but I'm very happy to see other people pick favourites as they go. Yeah.
And to be fair, it's really hard to pick a favorite, even from me who is actually reading the books. Even let's say that let's say I'm forced to choose a favorite character, then maybe I will choose Arian, because in Arian's story, there is several tropes that I really enjoyed there, like battle
Yeah.
school. So I'm curious also, do you have a favorite trope?
Um, I, I, I struggle with that, because now I think if I have favourite books and they
Uh,
might pick those out,
hmm,
and I'm sure that with the books I've read, things stay in my mind. So I know in your review of Arian that you mentioned the training school
yeah.
trope, and and that's actually that trope has stuck with me for a number of years from a historical fiction series. So North and South, written by John Jakes, probably 40 years ago, has a great training school trope in it of where they all go off to military academy together, and there's been lots of other good examples of that. So I'm
Oh,
certainly somebody who, if I see something and like something, I'm happy to think, can I adapt that and incorporate it if it in a way that tells a good story. But
hmm,
I don't think I would say I don't think I would ever approach it from saying this is my favorite trope and therefore
hmm,
I'll create a story around that. It's more I'm creating a story, and the key thing about a story is making it interesting to people. You can have the greatest prose in the world and a really interesting set of characters, but if all those people do are things that are boring as the story goes on, it's
yeah.
going to be a boring book. So it's finding ways to tell a story that tells about development of characters, that where events happen to them that are interesting, that create choices, dilemmas, sometimes difficult choices for them, but wraps that around things that happen to them that are interesting. And there's no way
Hmm,
anyone can write a book where everything that happens to a set of characters is original and
yeah.
hasn't been done before.
Hmm,
But it's trying to make the whole package original in the way that those things are put together. So, yeah, I probably don't. I probably don't think of it myself as think of it as tropes, but I'm sure when I'm writing, those thoughts go in my head without being consciously thinking, right, I'm going to use this trope now, or I'm going to use that trope, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And I completely agree with you regarding what you said. A beautiful prose alone doesn't mean that a book will immediately be good. It doesn't mean that. And there is this tendency sometimes from other readers that an accessible prose means that the book is lacking compared to those who write, let's say, with purple prose. And I completely disagree with that. I don't agree with that at all. I've read a lot of beautifully written books, but the story or the characters aren't compelling enough. And I don't like that.
No, my if you take the three things of sort of plot, characters, and prose, my attitude to prose is almost, it needs to get out of the way, in terms of the minute you start thinking about the prose, it's probably not doing its job, because it's either too purple or it's too disjointed. So for me, if someone can just read and it's easy to read, and then that can allow them to get into the story of the characters, the events that's happening, and follow that story, that for me is perfect in what prose should do. But different people have different opinions, and I know mine is not flowery prose, and some people don't like that, whereas some people that's perfect, and it's different opinions as to what people like.
Yeah, it's definitely true. Different tastes. And your prose, in my opinion, reminded me a bit of Brandon Sanderson, because he already mentioned this, that he, like you said, he doesn't want his readers to think about the prose. The prose needs to get out of the way. The story and everything else needs to be told, and I think that's achieved in Illborn very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and because Illborn is an incredibly character-driven novel, do you struggle with writing any of the POV characters, or all of them felt easy?
I don't struggle, but it wasn't easy to write them, in terms of, if I go back to the early edits, then there wasn't enough distinctiveness in some of the characters, and then I have to think about what can I do with those characters to make them feel more distinct when you're reading them, and that's part of what the editing process is for, and that was part of what the feedback that I got from readers. I don't find any of them harder to write than any of the others now, and in some ways it becomes easier to write them the more time I spend with them, because there's a certain style for each character that you get into, and you can fall, the easier aspect of it is you can automatically fall into that thing of what would X do in that situation? What would they think? How would they react? And the more familiar you are with the characters, the easier that becomes. The flip side of that at times is, if there's something you want to happen to advance the narrative that you've had in your mind, well, that'd be really good if that happened, and then you get to it, and then you're actually thinking, well, they'd never do that. That's the flip side of it. On one hand, it makes it easy to write them. On the other hand, the more they develop their own agency as characters, the more it can be. There's certain times when, well, that would have been a great narrative step, but it isn't going to happen now. I'm going to have to find another way around it. So, but no, I enjoy writing all of the characters, and I find I can quite quickly get back into their shoes when I return to a particular character to feel them when I come back to them.
I see. And so, are you more of a planner or a pantser when you write?
I'm definitely a planner.
Oh, really?
I have to have an idea of the direction of the book. The way I think about it myself is, it's like going up a mountain where you've got an idea that I'll start here, then I need to be here, and I need to be here, and I need to be here, and I need to be here. Okay. And some of that is attached to the key scenes in the book. That it's almost like a visual thing for me, that I need to get to this scene, but then how I can get between here and here, I've then got flexibility about. So I always like to have a detailed plan for a number of chapters set out ahead of me, a map for the plan for the book. But if I get to a point and think there's a better way of doing this, or there's a better way to go that keeps me in the same general direction. I'm happy to be flexible, but I'm flexible to a plan, because it's particularly with the four points of view. I think if I was literally just going pantser all the way, I don't think I could keep them balanced, moving against each other in a way that made sense. So there's always an element of needing to keep that balance in the story as it goes through. But just my nature is I need to plan for things. It's I'm very impressed that there are people who can sit down without that plan and
Yeah,
write
I
a
know.
book. And like Stephen King's a great example of that. He talks himself about, he says there's no such thing as plot, and he just pants his way through the whole story. Like he said halfway through The Stand, he'd been writing it for 6 months, and then he was halfway through and I have no idea how it was going to end, and he thought, I might have to throw all of this away.
Oh wow, Stephen King did that? I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
he said it. He got halfway through, didn't know how to finish the book. Then an idea occurred to him, and he carried on and did the rest of it. And most people would regard that as his greatest book as well. But no, I couldn't work like that. I always feel like I need to know where I'm going as I'm writing.
Yeah, I totally understand that. So before you release Illborn, do you like have any set of expectations towards how people will treat your book?
It's an odd one that when I was writing the first book, the first objective, it was to write a book. That was the goal I'd set myself. I'm going to sit down and write another fantasy novel, and it's going to be a lot better than the one I wrote when I was 16 years old. And I'm determined to finish it to the best standard I can and get that book finished. And then after I'd finished it, so I wasn't writing it to be thinking this is my publication plan and this is my marketing plan and these are what I'm going to do with it, which sounds incredibly naive compared to a lot of people, and it probably was. But I was just thinking, I want to write this story for myself because this is something I've wanted to do for the last almost 30 years when I sat down to write it. And then I'd finished it, and my readers, the beta readers, were turning around and saying to me, "This story is very good," which is really nice of them. And there's that doubt in your mind still then that says, these are people who know me. Are they just being nice? But they were saying to me, you should try and send this off and get it published. So I went through that process in the UK. And started with traditional publishing just because I had no idea what self-publishing involved, how to do it, or how on earth I would market the book. And I sent the book off to literary agents in the UK and traditional publishing, and I got nowhere. I didn't get a manuscript request, so I got one 10-minute meeting with an agent that wasn't particularly positive, and then. But essentially, he wasn't interested in the book, but he was just telling me why he wasn't interested. And then I took it away, and I genuinely came close to abandoning the book and just leaving it at that point in time, and thinking that's it, done. And I left it alone for a few months, and then it was annoying me that this, I thought I'd written something that was a good book, and I've been delighted to see that other people a number of other people think the same. And then I thought, well, I'll self-publish it, and I went down that route. And only when the book came out did I start properly thinking about, right, what do I do now to find an audience for this book? to the extent that I didn't have any social media accounts when I didn't create the social media accounts until after the book had come out. So I was a complete and utter social media novice. My sister set me up on Instagram. She showed me how to set up on Twitter, and then it's carried on from there. So it started very slowly and it's got quicker more recently. So it almost, if I go back to your original question, I was writing the book for myself. I was trying to write a book which was the kind of book that I love, blending genres that I love, across epic fantasy, but the things I love from historical fiction as well, some of which have had some great religious storylines in them as well, and creating something that I would be proud of as a book. And it was only after that the the audience for that book became to the forefront of my mind, to think, well, I would like this, so there'll be some other people who will like it as well if they read it. And it's been wonderful to see, wonderful to see the positive reviews, and you know, and the fact there's a lot more people like it than don't like it has been lovely. It's
so with that in mind, so from my perspective, and definitely from my experience, Illborn is loved by people who have read the books. So does it make it harder for you to write the sequel? Because there are now certain set of expectations now.
Yeah, it makes it different. I'll say that. It makes it feel different, because it is that the first book was written for me. I was the audience, and I was the only person who, for the vast amount of time that book was being written, I was the only person who had an investment in that book, who'd invested their time and, you know, their emotions into it. So that one belonged entirely to me. Whereas the second one, because thankfully there's a readership for it, it's like I'm paraphrasing that great quote of a book takes on a soul of its writer and all the people who read it. Well, that as soon as your book gets read by other people, that's happened to Illborn. So there are a lot of other people who are very grateful now, have taken the time to read the book. They've enjoyed it and they're interested in the second one. So because of that, those people are interested in book two and what I'm doing. But I think the key for me in writing book two is almost to try and put that out of my mind and write it the same way that I wrote book one, which is I've got a vision of what I want the story to be across the series and where I want it to go, and I've got to stay true to that vision. And I've got to do, you know, the first book I wrote the book out of joy. So I wrote it because it was something I wanted to do. And the worst thing I could do for book two is write a book out of other emotions like fear, for worry of how people might react to that book. Yeah. If as far as I'm concerned, if I write that book out of joy and love for telling the story, then I've got the best chance of getting the same reaction to book two as I've got for book one. Yeah. The other bit that I think for me really feeds into that is the quality control thing for me, and it comes back to the planning. So for book one, you know, I didn't sit down and suddenly these words spring onto the page as a finished manuscript. I know the amount of work I did, editing, re-editing, rewriting, editing that again. My wife did 2 rounds of edits of the book for me. I got feedback from writers. So it was, I'm not someone who naturally can just sit down and create something. I worked at it and I grafted at it. And then it got to a point where when I'd finished it, it was as good as I could possibly make it in my mind. Now, I'm sure I could go back to it now and think, oh, I wish I'd written that scene like that, or I wish I'd done that. But at the point I said, this is done, I thought it was as good as I could make it. And the key thing for me with the second book is to have exactly the same approach to quality control. It's not to think, right, I'm the big I am now because people have liked the first book. It's to remember the only reason the first book ended up the way it did is because of the work I put in. And that's a long-winded way of getting to saying that the same approach will apply to book two. So book two will be finished when it's finished. It will never be finished to set so I can hit a publication date that I'd like to hit for people. I will only set a definite publication date for book two when I have a finished manuscript. Now I'm going to try and write it as quickly as I can, but I'm not going to take any shortcuts to get to that. I mean, I want to get a book out to people as quickly as I can, but I will not under any circumstances put something out that I don't think is ready, because I'll only get one chance to write this series. And I want to get to the end of that thinking each book is as good as it possibly can be when I put it out. I hope that makes sense. But so going back to your question, writing book two, it is certainly different, but for me, I've got to try and make it so it's not different as much as I can do.
Yeah, I understand that. Totally understand. This is something that Patrick Rothfuss has struggled a lot because there are a lot of expectations towards his third book, right? Doors of Stone. And especially because he's a perfectionist. And yeah, now well, we all know that it has been a long time before the third book comes out. And I think that's kind of the same for George R. R. Martin.
Yeah, I think the scale of their readership and the pressure they might feel is is infinite orders of magnitude different to the scale of my readership. I think they're both at the J.K. Rowling level of pressure now with the number of people who've read the books, and you can imagine it, particularly George R. R. Martin. Not only has he got the difficulties of all this pressure, he's got the difficulties that his storyline has already in Dance of Dragons has already split off from the TV series.
Yeah.
So he's now got to try and write something where somebody else has finished the story for him. But having said that, he keeps writing computer games and other books. So I can only have so much sympathy. Well, he's just created the storyline for another computer game, hasn't he? So if he wasn't doing that, he might have a better chance of finishing it. No, I can imagine Patrick Rothfuss and George R. R. Martin. The pressure they must feel must be immense with the number of people who are invested in their storylines. It must be massive pressure.
Yeah, it's millions of people around the world. Scary.
Yeah.
So, how? I think you mentioned, right, that Illborn will be 4 books. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, does it mean that you already outlined everything to the conclusion of the series?
In a high level map of the entire story through the series, yes, that was.
That's impressive.
Yeah, well, as I said, one of the difficulties of that is the characters getting in the way of what I've mapped out. But yeah, it's there are things in the first book that I hope people will see the payoff in later books and think, right, okay, there are things that I've written from the outset with the view of the whole story in mind. No, I've set myself a big challenge in what I've done, and I hope I can pull it off. But if I do pull it off, then I think if it comes together over the 4 books, then I could be proud of what I've achieved. But there's a lot of work to get there between now and the end of book 4. A lot of work.
How long has you been writing for the second book? How long?
I started writing it in January last year. So as soon as I stopped the publication process, effectively, as soon as I'd done the I've lost my word, the typeset proof for book 1, sent that off. Then I started writing book 2. So I've got to a first draft, and effectively it's had 1-2 edits at the end of December, but there's a lot of work still to do on it. So it's a book that is of a similar length to book 1, just slightly shorter at the moment. But and I'm not sure how that will change during the editing process. So I have a first draft manuscript that I'm in the process of editing as we go, which is going to be an exercise of months. I know that, and it's just I don't know. I can't judge exactly how long it will be. I know that I'm putting in a good shift every week to work on it, but there's also a point where I know if I work too many hours in a week, I get it's diminishing returns on the quality side of it. So I'm keeping plugging away every week to pull the story into the best possible shape it can be. But there is a story there that's finished, sitting on a manuscript now that needs work attaching to it.
I wish you the best of luck, really. And this is a thick book. This is a thick book. And by the way, when you finish writing Illborn, this one, do you actually reread the book again?
Yeah. When I'd finished writing it, because I did my own proofing. Effectively, this is a part of my writing style but it's why it takes me a long time. Is I read everything that I write out loud to myself multiple times, because it for me, it helps me with flow of the book. So I can read a paragraph. It's that thing of the prose getting out of the way. I can read a paragraph, and if I read it out loud, I can tell better if it flows versus if I just read it on the page. So when I got to the proofing stage, I actually read the whole book to myself again.
Oh my God.
It took quite a while, but they did actually, even that picked up some things at the point of doing that. So no, but I have read the whole book, yeah. And before I finalize book 2, I'm going to go back and read book 1 again. I've been reading it a lot during the process of writing book 2, or reading sections of it for the continuity thing, to make sure that I do nothing in book 2 that's inconsistent with book 1.
Oh yeah.
But before I do a final sign off on book 2, I'm going to go back and read book 1 again to make sure there's nothing I've missed as I've gone through it that I can pick up again. I'm very meticulous. As you probably tell, there are some people who it all I'm sure comes easy to, comes natural to. For me, I have to get to where the quality I want something to be at the end. I have to work and just follow a process to get there. And I'll do the same thing. I'm fully determined to do the same thing in book 2.
Yeah. Okay. What's the word count for Illborn? The word count.
For Illborn is 220,000 words.
Okay. And so the second book will be something around that as well.
Yeah, it's north of 200,000 words. So I don't want to quote where it is yet. So I'd rather, but it's another book that's north of 200,000 words.
Okay. I'm amazed that you still have the time to read other people's book.
Yeah, so that's an evening thing. Yeah, I do. It's less. I mean, I see some people who can read, hundreds of books a year, and I'm for bigger books, I can average probably one a month, which I read in evenings and at weekends, which is not as much as I once read. I once read a lot more books than that, but it's and there was a long time. Where I've cut down recently is I've read a lot of historical fiction, and also historical books, so factual historical books. I read a lot of that. I've had to cut back on that quite a bit recently because I just don't have the time to do it. But I do like to have a book on the go now. I just don't get as much of a chance to read as I used to do.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. And some authors have actually mentioned that ever since they became a fantasy author, they cannot read any more fantasy books. Do you feel the same as this?
No, I'm definitely, that's because I still enjoy reading them. I just have to put myself in a very different mindset compared to my own book. So when I'm doing my own book, it's like I concentrate on every single word that I can't go through it quickly. But when I'm reading someone else's book, I describe it as I go into a reading trance where if it's a good book, I can have read 6 pages and then got to the end of those 6 pages and forgotten where I was or what, I've forgotten I was reading a story. I've just been immersed in it. That for me distinguishes other people's books from mine, because I can never get to that state with my own book, because I'm always reading it from an editing point of view of, would it be better if I switched that word for that word? Would it be better if I broke that into 2 sentences or put those 2 sentences together? I can never go into the reading trance on my own because I'm always thinking about, does it sound right? Where someone else has released a book, that's not my problem at that stage. Just there to enjoy it, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And that makes sense. Do you have any recent any recent books that you finished that you can recommend to readers?
Yeah, well, I recently finished The Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne.
Oh yeah, I love that series so much.
So that was actually the last book I finished. Was get my order right? Is it Wrath? Is the last one? That was the last book that I finished. I read last year. I read Reaper's Gale and The Bone Hunters by Stephen Erikson. Both absolutely awesome books. The Bone Hunters is a masterpiece.
Agree. I agree.
And then that sort of thing. And I've read a number of good self-published books over the course of the last year. I don't want to start name checking people because I'm worried if I do, I'll forget to name check certain people. But if I said what are the two series that have stood out for me in the last year have been Faithful and the Fallen and Carrying On with Malazan. I've got the last two books of Malazan to read, which I'm keeping for the summer this year. When I go on holiday in the summer, I want to read books 9 and 10 and finish the series. So, but yeah, have you finished that whole series, Petrik?
Yeah. And I did finish it when I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. It was so awesome. I mean, the book number 9, in my opinion, wasn't as good because he divided one big book into book 9 and book 10, right? So book 10 is all the payoff of book 9, and I think it's so worth it. It's so worth it. Yeah,
it's a big commit. It's a 12,000 page commitment, that series, though, isn't it?
But you finished The Wheel of Time. That's even bigger. So yeah, I think we're almost at the end of this conversation. So before we end this interview, I just want to ask one more question. What has been the best experience so far for you as an author? The biggest highlight of you as an author so far?
It's getting people who've read the book and getting a positive feedback to it. I can remember the first genuine review from, I'll say, from a stranger that came in, who was like really excited about the ending of the story, and I remember getting that, and I couldn't sleep that night. I was so excited that that someone had read the book and had had that kind of emotional reaction to it. And it's been wonderful since then, seeing other people read the book and enjoy it, and that's the biggest thing. It's seeing people read the book and react to it and have a positive reaction. I mean, your review was fantastic, and there's been other reviews from professional reviewers that have been positive, that have been fantastic as well. But I think in terms of the like emotional reaction, was that very first review that came in that actually someone likes this book. It isn't just my friends and family being nice to me, saying nice things. It's I've written something here which at least one person enjoys, and if you're not writing, ultimately, I wrote a book. I started off writing a book for myself that I wanted to achieve that goal, but you want people to enjoy what you've written, and finding a readership for it is the thing that counts most of all as an author, and a readership that enjoys it. And it's and now knowing that I'm writing book 2 and other people want to carry on that journey with me is fantastic. And and I want to see this journey through to the end of book 4 and have people follow me the whole way through it and enjoy the books. And I really appreciate everything that people have done so far to support me as a self-published author, and I massively appreciate what you've done to help the book in the last 2-3 months, Petrik, is really appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're really welcome, and I'm really thankful again. It's really the best book that I read last month. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the end of this conversation. And when can we? I know that there is no estimation yet for this one, but approximately when can we expect the second book?
I hope to publish the second book in November this year or before the end of the year, but it's also possible it might slip into the early part of 2023, and I just don't know at this point in time. I'm too far away from the cut-off point at which I have to make a decision on November to be able to judge that properly at this time.
Yeah, well, whenever it's ready, just take your time. I will be reading it as soon as it's ready.
Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, that's it for today's conversation with Daniel T. Jackson. And I just want to say thank you so much, Daniel, for visiting this channel. I hope that the writing process for the second book will go well and that more people will pick up Illborn. Yeah, if you watching this interview and you haven't read Illborn, I really suggest that you pick up Illborn. It is an amazing character-driven epic fantasy book.
Thank you, Petrik. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye. Lovely to speak to you. Thank you. Bye.